Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Youth Ledger. I'm your host, Shiven Diwakar. I'm excited to talk to you about this week's past economic, geopolitical, and policy related shifts. Over the next few minutes, we'll break down all the major developments, what happened, who's involved, why it matters, and what lies ahead, especially for both global leaders and everyday citizens like us. From a dramatic escalation of conflict between Israel and Iran to central banks cautiously acting amid economic uncertainty and renewed trade diplomacy at the G7, we'll cover it all. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We'll begin with the cautious stance of major central banks. First, let's talk about the European Central Bank, or ECB. This week, the ECB held rates steady after 8 consecutive cuts, with the deposit rate remaining at 2%, which is nonetheless the lowest level in 2 years. President Christine Lagarde emphasized that this decision was data-driven, and she cited mixed economic signals. Also, Bundesbank's Nagel stressed the need to stay flexible due to global uncertainties, while chief economist Philip Lane reminded us inflation is still hovering near target levels. The ECB also noted that the financial stability risks are increasing due to global political turbulence and uneven growth across member countries. Now let's talk about the Bank of England. The Bank of England is expected to follow suit with the ECB this Thursday and continue the trend of not changing interest rates, especially with inflation surging to 3.5% in April and uncertainty about US President Donald Trump's tariffs. The latest growth figures also show a 0.3% fall in April, which was after the economy's growth in the previous month and was thus an uncertain expectation. Housing affordability also remains a particularly hot-button issue in the United Kingdom, especially for first-time buyers reliant on variable-rate mortgages. Now, time to move across the Atlantic to the United States. Here, Jay Powell and friends at the Federal Reserve are being just as cautious as usual, despite pressure from President Trump for keeping, and I quote, interest rates too high for too long, as he expressed earlier on Truth Social. Some argued that the president has a point, with US inflation remaining near the 2% targets, but many others agree with the Fed's reluctance to initiate cuts ahead of September. Interest rates are expected to be held steady at the meeting this week, and markets now price about a 60% probability of rate cuts in Q4, down from nearly 100% 6 weeks ago. What's notable is the Fed's coordination with other central banks, an emphasis on a global economy where isolated action can have ripple effects. So in general, the roadmap ahead is quite clear. Rate cuts have slowed down, central banks are heavily favoring the wait-and-see model rather than doing something immediately, and inflation is still sticking above target, even amid geopolitical risks. For listeners, this translates into continued pressure on loans, mortgages, and consumer prices. It also means governments may pivot toward fiscal measures, like targeted stimulus, where monetary tools may be limited or deemed not enough. In the Middle East, a momentous and very unfortunate escalation unfolded this week. Under the name of Operation Rising Lion on June 13th, Israel executed over 200 sorties targeting more than 100 Iranian nuclear sites in Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities, including Natanz and military headquarters. Reported high-ranking casualties, both military and civilian, have raised the stakes and charged Iran's response. This response was named Operation True Promise 3, and it involved Iran aiming 150 ballistic missiles and over 100 armed drones at Israel. However, the Israeli air defenses were fortunately able to intercept around 80 to 90% of these. Throughout all this, the civilian toll is notable. Over 100,000 civilians evacuated areas south of Tehran after enduring missile warnings. Fuel, food, and medical supplies became scarce quickly, and refugee camps expanded overnight. Iran has instituted major internet blackouts in key cities, resulting in growing unrest and urging greater global concerns. Economically, the consequences have been quite noticeable. Oil prices spiked nearly 10%, with Brent crude climbing to $78 a barrel, its highest level in over 2 years. Markets appear vulnerable to threats in oil transport corridors and supply chain shocks, such as along the Strait of Hormuz, where disruption could double oil prices. Following Iran's diplomatically worded neutrality, global equities rebounded 1% and oil declined around 4%. Geopolitically, this conflict marks a shift in the strategic chessboard. This is the first direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, with events in the past just being proxies. Global bodies and numerous countries, including the United Nations, European Union, and US, have urged de-escalation. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are mediating the conflict. Israel reinforced ties with the Abraham Accords nations, and Iran deepened alliances with Russia and China. Overall, oil prices surge, and this impacts everything from heating bills to fertile costs, leading to agricultural economies suffering. Financial markets obviously dislike this instability, and capital flight, volatility, and safe haven flows are rising. Amid all the drama, the World Bank reported sobering trends. Global growth slumped to 2.3%, its weakest since the 1960s, not including outside recessions. Foreign direct investment dropped to $435 billion, the lowest since 2005. Several economies, including those in Asia and Africa, saw double-digit growth downgrades. These changes are more than just a handful of numbers, and rather could have a variety of long-term effects. Lower growth means less revenue, weaker job market, paused infrastructure development, and stalled climate investments. Younger economies may suffer most, thus creating a generation-wide setback. At the G7 meeting in Canada, leaders pledged economic collaboration and trade alignment, spearheaded by the UK-Canada collaboration on the CPTPP expansion. While tensions remain in US-China and US-EU relations, multilateral trade initiatives stay alive, with the priority being placed on digital trade frameworks. Bottom line, even amid geopolitical risk, there are pockets of economic optimism. So stay positive, everyone. In conclusion, what are the key takeaways from this episode? Well, first, central banks are walking a tightrope, trying to balance inflation control with global turbulence. Second, the Israel-Iran clash is sending shockwaves across energy markets and geopolitical alliances. Third, global growth is slowing sharply, putting development plans under threat. And fourth, trade diplomacy through the G7 still offers hope, but risks loom large. And even though it might not always seem like it, these macro-level stories touch your daily micro-level lives. Our fuel costs, our job stability, our college financing, even career paths and global affairs. Everything is related. So thank you so much for tuning into this deep dive of the week's biggest developments. If you found this episode insightful, subscribe and follow. The TikTok and YouTube pages are now up and running, and I upload shorts daily, so please take a look at those. And as always, please share your thoughts below. I always love to see them, and I appreciate whatever you could write. Signing out, this is Shiven Diwakar. See you next time on the Youth Ledger.